Okay, so we're talking about Judaism and the Kabbalah, which is esoteric Judaism, which is the philosophical bit behind Judaism. Now, why is it important? Numerically, the Jewish people are not that significant. There's about 8 or 10 million or so in the world. Obviously, there's fewer now than after the Holocaust. But historically, they've been incredibly important in terms of their influence on other world religions. And why that is because of the history of Judaism and going back also to the geography, which I'll look at a bit. Also, obviously, Jewish thinkers have contributed a lot to modern philosophy. In physics, they study relativity theory and Einstein's work. Obviously, he was Jewish and an important thinker. Sir Isaac Newton, who was the greatest physicist Britain produced, was also very influenced by the Kabbala, particularly, which is esoteric Judaism. And so was Freud, Jewish, another great philosopher of the mind, the unconscious. And Carl Jung, his colleague, who then broke away from him, was also influenced by the Kabbala. And even Karl Marx, and the whole Marxist tradition, obviously Marx was Jewish, he was also influenced by esoteric Judaism. So what is this thing? What does it mean, the Kabbalah? It's been incredibly influential, but it's amazing how few people have really heard of it or know what it's about. Christianity too, obviously Jesus was Jewish initially, and he was a master of esoteric teachings. And if you study the origins of Kabbalah, you can see that it makes sense of the New Testament as well. It makes sense of Christ's teachings. So there is a tradition called Christian Kabbalah, which I'll talk about later, which argued that you couldn't really understand Christianity unless you understood the Kabbalah, because that's esoteric Judaism. So unless you have that grounding of knowledge, the whole of the Old Testament's closed to you, the whole of the Bible actually. Once you've got that key, the whole thing begins to fall into place, and then the New Testament, Christ's teachings, become clear what he was actually trying to do and why. So it's incredibly interesting and therefore important. And I've spent, 20 years trying to study it myself, working in London, which is one of the world centres for the Kabbalah. Obviously the Jewish community there is quite old. And also I've studied in New York at the Jewish seminary there, which is part of the university system where they train rabbis and things. And also in Israel, I've visited a couple of times and gone to the great centre of Kabbalah, which is a place called Safat, which is a centre in North Israel, near Galilee. So I think it's extremely interesting, this whole history. Firstly, let's look at Judaism as a whole, and then see what the Kabbalah is that it's emerged out of it. If you look at the maps, you'll see that Israel, stuck there at the eastern coast of the far Mediterranean there, is like a crossroads of civilizations. It's very close to Egypt, and historically there's a very strong link between Egyptian philosophy and the Kabbalah and esoteric Judaism. The caravan routes going through down into Jordan and then down into Arabia they came to Gaza on the coast and then up the coast as well. So it was on caravan routes for the whole of the Arabian Peninsula and then on to the Mesopotamian region. We looked last week at Babylon and Sumeria and their religions. Well, that's very, very close. As the crow flies, you can get from Israel to Iraq in pretty much a day, actually. And I was telling you how Agatha Christie used to go. I think she used to get the train to Damascus, and then a jeep would take her from there across the desert to Iraq. So Israel is like at the crossroads of all these ancient civilizations, and therefore, not surprisingly, it inherited aspects of the wisdom of them all. Although the ancient religions of Babylon and Sumeria and ancient Egyptian religion have all gone, pretty much, Israel, which comes from that same time period, lives on. And in a sense, those ancient religions live on in Judaism. And for example, the 7 days of the week that the Jewish calendar uses, the Shabbat or Sabbath that they celebrate, which for them is from a Friday night to a Saturday night, because their day starts in the evening. Just now it's already Tuesday now, it's just started. Comes from ancient Babylonian custom. Ancient Babylonian religion had a week of 7 days, and on the seventh day there was rest. And the gods used to rest. And the word Shabbat comes from ancient Babylonian, in fact. They took their calendar from the ancient Babylonian religion. So, and they were related peoples. The Hebrew people are Semitic peoples, like the ancient Babylonians were. And their languages are quite similar. So all the ancient religious texts I talked about last week, about the gods of the underworld and all that kind of thing, basically kind of live on in some way in Judaism. And we talked about how the ancient flood story was also part of that older religious tradition of Babylon, which lives on in Judaism. So when did it come? How old are we talking? Most people put the origin of Judaism with the birth of Abraham, who historically, biblical scholars date to about 1750 BC. If you look at what the texts say about Abraham and his milieu, where he was living in Ur, which is in ancient Sumerian culture, it fits with about that date, 1750, okay, which is a very long time ago. What was going on in the world then that was so revolutionary, and why I think Abraham, personally I think he did exist, he was a historical character. Some of the stories in the Bible we have about him I think are probably close to true. We can't prove it, we've never dug up an ancient engraved stelae saying Abraham was here, this is his life story. What we have is the biblical text which tells his life story in Genesis. But scholars who studied it have said this must go back to an ancient oral tradition that was passed down within his family circle. Now, what was going on at that time, that was so revolutionary, was the invention of the alphabet. And the idea of the alphabet was in the air from about 1750 to about 1500 BC. Okay, they were thinking up this idea that why don't we have one shape per sound? And what's very interesting is that it's at that precise time that you get the lineage of patriarchs in the Bible, from Abraham to Isaac, and then Jacob, and then from Jacob to the 12 sons who founded the 12 tribes. Jacob was renamed Israel, which means he who struggles with God. El is God. And this is the sort of the descent of the belief of Judaism. Now, one of the 12 sons of Jacob was called Judah. And each of these sons got a different part of Canaan. And so they were... the people who got the territory of Judah became known as the Judeans. And that gave rise to the term Judaism. Okay, but actually, technically, the religion of Jacob and Isaac and Abraham wasn't Judaism. That was the term of one of the sons of Israel. So, the religion of... What was the religion of Abraham? Well, the Hebrew word. They spoke Hebrew, and the word in Hebrew is din, which simply means religion. Okay? And they followed what's called the Torah, which is the law. And the Torah has two forms, the written Torah and the spoken. So, at the time of the idea of the alphabet arises the first idea, we could write down our sacred scriptures. We could tell a story of our people. Okay, and that became the written Torah, which was very, very holy. And eventually it became their sacred texts, the sacred scriptures, which are written on scrolls. There were no books in those days. And they were written down with a Hebrew alphabet that had no vowels.